they kept talking, and Chiefy finally, right before Thanksgiving of 1980, says to Jim, Jim, why don't you just listen, take home my trial transcript, read it, see what you think, and let's talk after you read it. So Jim took it back, went to his dorm room, read the trial transcript, came back the next week, and Chiefy said, so what do you think? And Jim said, well, Chiefy, I think you may be innocent. And Chiefy goes, so what are you going to do about it? And Jim goes, what do you mean? What am I going to do about it? I mean, I'm a seminarian, for Pete's sake. And Chiefy goes, well, you can't just go back to your little dorm room and pray for me. God uses humans, and you're the only human I have. And so Jim did go back to his dorm room. He did pray, and then he took the next year off from January of 81 to December of 81, and took it off from seminary and reinvestigated, went into the scariest parts of Trenton, and just reinvestigated, didn't know what he was doing. He'd never done this stuff before. Found enough evidence to show that the star witness was lying. The prosecutors knew it, the police knew it. They knew that other witnesses were lying, that they discounted the alibi witness, blah, blah, blah. He finds a pro bono lawyer. They get it before a federal judge. The federal judge rules that Chiefy is innocent and throws out the conviction. And Jim McClosky graduates from Princeton Seminary and realizes that his call is not to the pulpit, it's not to churchgoers, it's to the wrongly convicted. So he started this organization called Centurion Ministries, and they basically take non-DNA cases. This was 10 years before the Innocence Project. So I called up Jim. It was 2016, and I didn't really get going on the story until 2017, but I called up Jim in 2016, and I said, Jim, you've gotten about 65 people off of either death row or life sentences. What's the case that haunts you? And he goes, oh, that's easy. Ben Spencer's case. And the reason it haunted him is because Jim had taken his case, found enough evidence to prove to a judge 20 years after the crime, which was 1987, prove to a judge that another person did it and that there was no evidence to implicate Ben Spencer, that he had been wrongly convicted. The judge ruled that he was actually innocent, but the judge couldn't let him out. In Texas, because this was Dallas, in Texas, the Court of Criminal Appeals, the highest criminal court, had to agree. And the court waited 3 years, and they said, no, you know what? There's no DNA in this case. We're not going to let you out, Ben Spencer. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. That was in 2011. I called Jim in 2016. At that point, Ben had no hope of getting out. What new evidence can you find 30 years after the fact? The crime took place. It was a crime of two black men killing a white man, robbing and killing a white man. No one saw it. Nothing implicated Ben. No forensics, no fingerprints. He didn't have, any stolen, no blood on him, no stolen property, nothing. He had an alibi, and yet 3 people said that they saw Ben running away from the victim's car. And what came out is that they wanted the $35,000 in reward money that was offered by Ross Perot, who was then a big man in Texas, and a jailhouse snitch who said Ben confessed to him, when really the jailhouse snitch just wanted to see his 25-year sentence reduced to 14 months, which is what happened. So Jim pulls all this information, before a judge. The judge rules he's innocent. The Court of Criminal Appeals says no. And I decided I would go down, and I teamed up with a private investigator. And in 2017, I went down, did the story for The Atlantic and for National Public Radio. We found 2 of the 4 witnesses recanted. We found a new alibi witness, and it was we had the time of our lives. So Ben and I had been trading letters for a little while, for a few months. But I didn't know what to expect. I'd seen pictures of them or whatever. But you go down to Cofield Unit, which is about 2 hours south of Dallas. It's a maximum security prison, and you wait there in this space where there are a lot of stools and there's plexiglass, bulletproof plexiglass in between you and him. And I waited and waited, and finally the door opens, and this man, tall man, 6'4", I have to tell you, drop dead gorgeous. He's very, very handsome. Tall man walks in, um, sits down. He is the most soft-spoken, gentlest person I've ever met, ever, really, ever, to this day. Um, he'd been in prison by that point for 30 years. And, I asked him to tell the story. And what was interesting is he was not bitter. The worst thing he said is that being in prison when you're innocent is like being in a coma. It's like you're not real, you're breathing and you're alive, but you're not really living. And one day you hope you'll wake up from this coma. But I've been in this coma for 30 years. And he said what he tried to do, the way he survived prison, was two things. The first is he got back to his faith. He had been raised in the church. He had, married, was expecting a baby when he was arrested. They weren't really going to church, but he'd been grounded in faith. And what he began to do is actually absorb the Bible, both in the Old and the New Testament. Look at how we're commanded to, love your enemies, bless those who curse you. If your enemy asks for your cloak, give him, your second cloak. Like go the extra mile. He began to absorb this stuff. And what happened is that people actually treated him really well. Like I saw how the guards treated the other prisoners who came in to meet with visitors. They were indifferent, they would stop them right at the hour. They treated Ben well. They let the two of us talk for an hour and 20 minutes before they finally realized that they were going to get in trouble if they let him stay any longer. They treated him well. They ushered him in and out. He became this, just unbelievably gentle, kind guy. That was one way. So he really dug into his faith. The other thing that happened is that birds of a feather flock together. That's what his friends who are prisoners told me. Basically, you can tell who's innocent in prison. Most people in prison, what you hear from the outside is that everyone in prison says they're innocent. That's actually not true. Everyone says that they're innocent until they go to prison. Then it becomes a badge of honor and a protection to say that you murdered someone. The only people who won't cop to what they did are rapists, right? Because you do not want to be a rapist, but in prison. But everyone else, they say what they did. Ben Spencer and the few people who were innocent basically had a what I call it the network of innocence, INNOCENTS. The people who were innocent formed a network. They would go to the law library together. They worked out together. They would go to church together. They often got work assignments together. And people gave them respect. They not only protected each other, but everyone knew that they shouldn't be there and watched them. And they all had the same sort of demeanor. It's what you referred to in the beginning. Like, you can't understand how these people aren't bitter and angry. They learned early on that bitterness is a cancer, that anger is a poison, and you're going to die from it. And they just decided to scrub it. They would help each other just scrub it from their lives. And they're like better than the rest of us. They're better than any of us. Ben is a better guy than anyone I know, right? And so I've strayed from your question. What was it like meeting him? Um, he was gentle, very articulate. He writes beautiful letters. beautiful letters. High school graduate who writes better than my husband's college students. Um, he was lovely, he was funny, he wouldn't criticize people, he didn't blame the people who framed him. He kind of understood where they were coming from. They were poor, they wanted the money. It was kind of like, who is this guy? And we just had a wonderful conversation. I saw him I saw him a few times. You had to wait a couple of months before you would see him. We would talk. He would call me every other Sunday evening, and we'd talk. Uh, and I just got to know this guy and respect him. And I began to fear for his life because he was there during COVID, and he lived in a dorm room with 110 other men, right? A few feet away from the next guy. Um, and there was, he was there in 2020, 2021, right? And I began to fear for his life. He made it through. But he was an amazing person to see and to read his letters and to talk to on the phone.
I can imagine when you're then, taking drafts of chapters, would you collaborate like, would you send him different parts of the book as you'd finish, or did you send him a manuscript to read
Yeah,
before it was
yeah.
published?
I
What was the reaction like, that experience?
Yeah. Yeah, it was he was very I mean, he corrected me. He's very precise. Like the cover of the book, I tell everyone um it's the courthouse in 1987, the Dallas courthouse. And it wasn't only after it was published did he say, Barb, that's actually not the courthouse in 1987. That's actually such and such a place. He's very precise. So he would correct my mistakes. Uh, he never tried to change the tone. I really try. uh, What you have to know is that when I do my books very much like I do my reporting. I mean, my books are reportage. I tape all my interviews. I had hundreds of hours of tape from him, his friends, from all sorts of people, the people on the other side, the victims' sons, I mean, all sorts of people. And so I always knew what I was saying was accurate because I had it on tape. Um, but I would let people who were crucial to this see ahead of time what I had them say, and if the nuance were wrong or whatever, I would listen and I would make it right. With him, he never wanted to change any of the nuance. Um, he did bawl me out afterwards, though, about one thing, bawling out. Yeah, he said, "Barb, I kind of have a bone to pick about one thing that you said." Like, yeah, Ben, what? And he said, "Well, the judge in 2021 or 2021, right, when he was getting out, we persuaded the district attorney that he didn't get a fair trial, and so he got out in 2021 pending a new trial. The judge, you were kind of critical. She kept me in jail for a couple of months while she was deciding, and you were kind of critical." And I'm like, "Yeah, everyone was critical, Ben. It was during that great ice storm in Texas. Remember that one when the ice, North Vortex came or Arctic Vortex came? Yeah, you were out there, you were in jail without a coat, without reading material. They're keeping you there for 2 months. Of course I was critical." And he goes, "Well, Barb, her mom had just died, and you have to give her, I mean, people need time to grieve, and, she wanted to get on top of the material." That's what he was like. He was making excuses for someone who prolonged his suffering. That's what he was like. So that was the main criticism I got from Ben, is that I was too hard on one person who prolonged his suffering.